And I need to introduce tonight's speaker, and I probably really don't have to do too much for him because everyone here knows him. Our guest speaker tonight is Mark Weddington, who is our Assistant Director and Curator of Collections. So he is overall in charge of our plant collections here at the Arboretum, and he's here speaking tonight about his recent trip to New Zealand, where he was invited as a guest speaker at one of the locations over there, and he took some time while he was over there, because it's a good distance to go, to do some other botanic garden visiting, some nursery visiting, some nature sites, and we're here to learn about it tonight. And one little quick warning, Mark is experimenting with a new way to do presentations. I think he has it all hammered out, which is great. And I am actually doing a screen capture on the computer, so I am also experimenting, and keep your fingers crossed that it all works out well, because we got a bunch of new stuff happening. But there you go, Mark.
Everybody hear me? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Yeah, and like Chris said, I'm trying a new presentation program. So hopefully it works. Hopefully it doesn't make you sick to your stomach because it kind of moves around. But we'll see how it goes. Sorry to get going dark. First, I want to thank, I know there are quite a few people in the audience who helped make this trip possible. My original plan was I was going to Taiwan. I had some money to help pay for a trip to Taiwan to collect the two endemic magnolias in Taiwan, the two endangered magnolias, Magnolia compressa and Magnolia Curator, which the Magnolia Society International had granted some funds. And then I was not actually an invited lecturer or like invited speaker down in New Zealand. If you're an invited speaker, they actually pay for it to get there. But I was asked to submit a talk. I'd given a talk in China the year before, and the programming committee asked me to submit another talk. And it was accepted, and so it was an expensive trip, so we put a call out to our wonderful members, and a lot of people took money to help me go. Couldn't go to Taiwan because of some weather issues there. There was a big typhoon, which kind of messed things up. So I'm still planning on going, so that money didn't disappear. If you gave money from the trip to Taiwan, it's still happening, but had to put it off for a season. I should say, Chris mentioned David Parks coming to talk at the Rock Garden Society about camellia collecting. He went with me to Taiwan one time, and I have pictures of him up in the tree, up in the tops of these tall camellias collecting seed. He does not have any pictures of me up on the tops of the camellias collecting seed. So New Zealand, I know I've talked with a few people who've been there, and I will tell you, first off, this isn't working.
Let me. Whoop. See if that works, Mark. There you go.
All right. So it's a long way. You get 2,500 miles from Raleigh to Los Angeles, and then another bit of a hop across the ocean, 6,500 miles. So you got 9,000 miles to get to New Zealand, which is a long trip. That's the first thing people ask me is, how long a trip is it? It's forever. But the secret, I've become a very good traveler as long as I'm traveling by myself. I get on a plane, I maybe have a glass of wine or a gin and tonic, I put on my headphones, I put on my little sleeping thing over my eyes, and I go to sleep for most of it. So I make it pretty easy on myself to travel that far, but it is a long flight. About 13 hours from Los Angeles. So New Zealand, a little about New Zealand. New Zealand is, it's about 900 miles from Australia. A lot of times people think it's much closer, but it's actually a pretty good distance from Australia. It's about 900 miles. It was really only settled by people in about 1250 to 1300. It hasn't had people on it for that terribly long compared to a lot of other parts of the world. And that was when Polynesians came down to New Zealand, liked it and stayed there and developed the Maori culture there. Abel Tasman came by mid-1600s. He got in a fight with the Maori and I think came out the worst end. I think he lost 4 or 5 crew members. I think maybe one Maori died in that fight. But you know, the Dutch claimed it because he had seen it. So that's how Europeans do it. So that's where it got the name New Zealand. The Dutch name for the area of the Netherlands called Zealand. So it was New Zealand. And then it really wasn't visited again until like 1768, 69, something like that, when Captain Cook came by and saw it, liked it. So, and after that, we have whalers and traders and all kinds of people coming down and visiting pretty often. But it's kind of amazing that the really Europeans didn't get there until about the time we were having our revolution. 1840, it became a British colony, so pretty late in the scheme of things, became a British colony. And the Maoris really, their populations declined by about 40%. They really went downhill. But there's a real resurgence in New Zealand. There's a real respect for the Maori culture. The Maori people really, are loud and proud about it. But also the New Zealanders are really proud of that culture. And when you see signs, the official languages are English, Maori, and Maori Sign Language. There's actually there's a sign language that people drop off of you, but that's the official language. And their signs have Maori on there and the English. And actually both islands, I won't try and do the Maori pronunciations of the North and South Island, but they have each of the 2 main islands have 2 official names. The North Island and South Island are their English names, and then they have Maori names, which is kind of interesting. What I found even more interesting was it was discovered just recently, last couple of years, that their names had never been officially documented, officially written. I didn't realize you had to do that, but it must be like plant names. Unless it's written in an official document, it's not named. And it wasn't until 2012, I think, that it finished up that whole process, and those names became the official names for those islands. There's also a bunch of other islands. Can't really see them up here, but the Kermadicks and Chatham Islands, and all the way down to Campbell Island, Stewart Island. But North and South Island are the main ones. Another interesting to me fact was, there were 3 species of bats. Other than them, no native mammals on the islands. Now they've discovered actually a prehistoric kind of mouse-like thing. They found fossils of it. So at some point there were some mammals on there, but really it's all the spots taken up typically by mammals are you've got birds and reptiles that are kind of filling those niches, which is kind of interesting. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But interesting place. So I flew into Auckland and flew out of Christchurch down here and drove down through a good bit of New Zealand. And so the road does go ever on in New Zealand because it takes forever to get anywhere. But starting in Auckland, flew in and went straight, this is what I do when I travel. Try and get there in the morning, get my rental car, and then I go straight out. Either go out in the woods, or in this case, went to the Auckland Botanic Garden. Figure get on local time as quickly as possible. There is one palm native to New Zealand, and that's the Nipau palm, which is the symbol for the Auckland Botanic Garden. Auckland is the biggest city. It's not the capital, but the biggest city. There's about 1.5 million people in Auckland. In the capital, there's about 400,000 people. So it's the one big city there. It was really neat. When I walked up to the garden, one of the first things I saw was this fountain. I couldn't quite figure it out until we got over to the other side. That kind of flanks this door, and so you have these 3 palms, and then you have those 3 fountains that are like the palms. So going in, it was an incredible garden, and I was really excited to see the plants there. Now this is not going to be a plant talk. I'm going to talk about some plants, but this isn't really so much a plant talk. But the flora of New Zealand is so different from what we grow. It is just, when I go to China, go to Japan, it looks pretty familiar. It looks, it's different plants, but it's pretty similar. It's the same genera or plants that look very similar and fill the same niche. It looks completely different in most of New Zealand. Even when I've been down in the tropical rainforest in South America, it's what I expect a tropical rainforest to look like. It's not here. Nothing looks right. But beautiful collections there, really large gardens, incredible, not just New Zealand, but incredible collections of other Southern Hemisphere gardens, which was exciting to me because there's a lot of Southern Hemisphere plants that I'd really like to grow, but we struggle with quite a bit. There were also, in addition to the plants, Auckland Botanic Garden was a really well-designed garden. It was really interesting layout. And you see this curl here. That's very, you see that a lot in New Zealand. Their symbol is a fern frond, which is a cyathea, one of the tree ferns there. The silver tree fern is their symbol. And you see this little swirl like the fiddlehead of a frond being used in a lot of their art, a lot of the traditional Maori decorations, but they also use it in landscapes and other more modern artworks as well. A lot of natural areas, the tree ferns. I was talking to somebody about the tree ferns before we started. I love tree ferns, they're so cool. And they have a ton of them in New Zealand. After a while, it gets pretty easy to tell them apart, especially if no one's quizzing you on you and doesn't know if you're wrong. But they also had a lot of other natural areas in the Auckland Botanic Garden, which I really liked. But it wasn't just the the native New Zealand plants I was going to see. There was a lot of other things there, and there was a lot of pretty cool stuff there. They obviously knew I was coming, so I did. I was lucky enough. I had gotten in touch with the folks at the Auckland Botanic Garden before I went, and so I had talked with them, and I was able to get a few cuttings and some things from the garden. But I was legal. But they had these all over the place. Every time you see one of those, you all of a sudden feel guilty. You start looking around. Where? I don't know if there are really cameras around. But the native plants there, really interesting. The Pseudopanax gallicii, a lot of Pseudopanax there. I'll show you some more. Gunnera. How many people have been to England or the West Coast and seen those huge Gunnera that are, the leaves are 8 feet across and the petiole is taller than your head? Well, there's big Gunnera and then there are little Gunnera too, both in South America and in Australia and New Zealand. This is one Gunnera manoica, which is just a little tight ground covering plant in damp spots. It's in flower. You see how showy that is in flower? Coprosmas, a lot of coprosmas down there. That's a group that's you see in Australia and New Zealand. And I'll talk a little bit about this growth habit when I'm talking about Dunedin Botanic Garden. And some groups of plants that I was really interested in discovering. Pittosporums. We grow mostly Asian Pittosporums, but there are tons of them from Australia, New Zealand area. And they're all different. That's a Pittosporum, that's a Pittosporum, that's a Pittosporum, this is a Pittosporum. They're big leaves, small leaves, they look nothing alike. This place blew my mind. I could not figure out what anything was. But there are other, not just the New Zealand plants, some really interesting plants even from Asia. Asian purpurescence. I saw this, thought it was in flower, and it was just the fruit on there. Pretty incredible. Now like this. Does anybody know Phytolacca? Anybody know what that is? Pokeweed. Well, this is a South American pokeweed, Phytolacca dioica. I joke when you turn your back on pokeweed and it gets 12 feet tall, and I say you gotta get the chainsaw. This is actually a woody tree. It's a big woody tree. I know there's one growing in Savannah, Georgia. It's pretty sad. It doesn't look like that. But one of the groups that I was really, two groups. Conifer. I'm a conifer nut. I love conifers, and we have. In Asia, Europe, the U.S., we've got a lot of pines and Pinaceae family, Cupressaceae and Taxaceae, Cephalotaxaceae. But the two that I'm really interested in are Arcariaceae and the Podocarpaceae. These are really mostly very primitive conifers. Even as conifers go, these are primitive conifers. And Auckland Botanic Garden had a whole section of the garden, a huge section that they were developing as their Gondwana collection, Gondwana land collection. And that's, when all the continents were still kind of jammed together. Gondwana was when you had Africa, South America, Australia, kind of still all in one place. And so there's a lot of these plants that are spread out across the southern hemisphere, even though they're separated by thousands and thousands of miles. Very similar plants in a lot of cases. And so the podocarps, I'm just go through. I mean, there were so many of them in these collections, and I'm not going to really talk about them. Although this one this is a Central American one. We do have one over here to give away afterwards. Rotorua, latest. All these. This is one of their native ones. There are 4 native podocarps or so, depending on your taxonomist. But Podocarpus totara, grow that here, and it typically stays a pretty small shrubby plant, but it's one of their larger trees in New Zealand. I'd love to get one growing that big. They do it on the West Coast, never been able to here. But and other things in the same family, Dacrydiums. This is one I really like, Halicarpus kirkii. This is it. It looks like a U right there. That's juvenile foliage. This is adult foliage. So it isn't even just a problem of trying to figure out what the plant is. Even when you get the plant, if you get it in the wrong growth phase, you still might not be able to figure it out. And then these weird things that they have down in that area. Phylocladus. Cladus is like a stem. That's a stem. So these leaves, this is kind of leaf stems. Each of these leaves are actually stems, flattened stems that take the place of leaves. You got to be a taxonomist to really, botanist to really get in there and figure out that they're not leaves. But kind of a cool thing. They call these celery pines because the foliage looks like celery. Agias, all kinds of stuff. And then the Araucarias, the Araucariaceae. Another group, get them in South America, you get them in Australia. And there are just some really cool things there. Now this is interesting. Araucaria heterophyllum, this is in part of that Gondwana land. They didn't just plant one of these things, they had a lot of space. They would plant dozens of them. Now, Araucaria heterophyllum, that's Norfolk Island pine. Okay, that's Norfolk Island pine, the house plant that people grow. How many people have been down to Florida and seen these up above houses down there? Yeah. Have you noticed they're always got a little curve to them? They're not standing straight up like this? You may not pay as much attention, but they always have a little curve. Years ago, way back, I don't know who it was, but a seed shipment came in of what was called Araucaria heterophyllum. And so all that stuff growing down there, they all call it Norfolk Island pine, they all call it Araucaria heterophyllum, but really, it's Cook Island pine down there. Araucaria columnaris, which always has that little crook in it. You won't convince, nurserymen and landscapers and gardeners down there but it really is. And if you get in and look at all the other details besides the growth habit, you can figure it out. But that's what's growing, and probably most of what we have as houseplants as Norfolk Island pine are the same thing. We just don't get big enough to flower and fruit, so you can't tell them apart just by looking at young plants. But there's other things in Araucariaceae, the Agathis, Agathis australis cowrie. This is the largest species of tree in New Zealand. They can grow 300 feet tall. I really wanted to see the oldest cowrie in New Zealand, but it's north of Auckland. And when you go about 10 miles north of Auckland and you are in the sticks. I mean, and roads get bad and it takes forever to get anywhere. And I had just finished up with basically 2 days of travel, 10-hour layover in Los Angeles. It's the worst airport in the world. 10-hour layover, not good. So I decided it'd be probably not a good idea to try and drive up there. But other agathis, macrophylla, microstachya, morii, I love these things. And the great thing about a lot of these podocarps and oricaceous plants is they grow in very low light conditions. And the foliage is like plastic. In fact, Ron Dieterman, who deals with a lot of tropical conifers at Atlanta Botanic Garden, calls them plastic carps because they're like plastic. And they grow in low light, and we've got a whole bunch of these that are not going to survive outside. But we're gonna grow them up, and at some point when they get big enough, the ficus and some of the things in here are going to go on the compost pile, and we're going to start having some of these plastic carps as our house plants in here. So now, just when my mind was getting blown, I finally saw something I recognized. This is our own Calycanthus ralstonii Hartledge wine. I see this everywhere. Japan, China, everywhere. Everybody loves this plant, which is kind of cool. But it wasn't just that. Also, This gardenia, this is Crown Jewel. This is Philip Darks from Oakmont Nursery. His introduction, just up the road from us right here in North Carolina. His introduction there. So, you know, they know good plants down there in New Zealand, and they know we've got them here in North Carolina. And even if you weren't a plant person, you walk around and you see just like acres of ground cover that's all livia. Reds, yellowy ones, peachy ones, oh, they're just all seedlings. I mean, it's just all. There are some that were such bright gold, I mean, brighter than anything I've ever seen in the U.S., and they're just growing in this ground cover out there. Amazing, amazing. So, after a little bit of time in Auckland, I drove down to Hamilton. Mostly, really was going to visit this nursery, Bruntwood Nursery. Several folks had told me I got to visit Bruntwood Nursery. It's a great nurseryman there. He's knows Ted very well. Many of y'all probably know this, but our director Ted Bilderback, before coming here, spent 6 months. He and his wife spent 6 months in New Zealand working with the soil companies and fertilizer companies for the nursery industry. In New Zealand, the government did away with the extension service, and it shows that the nursery industry lags way behind what we have in the U.S. The extension service, people don't realize how much good it does with the nurseries. But he spent a lot of time there. I was really hoping he was going to be here. I forgot he wasn't going to be here because I was going to make fun of him. You go around sheep pellets. Actually, at the end of people's driveways, there'll be bags, just bags, and it'll have, say, sheep pellets in there, $5, and there'll be, you know, like a little can there with a little slit in the top of the rubber lids. You can put your $5 in and pick up a big bag of sheep pellets for fertilizer, or you can go and get them, you know, in a plastic, nice sealed bag. More sanitary when it didn't come to it. But I was going to make fun of Ted and told him that, you know, he had done some good there. He moved him from sheep pellet to super sheep pellets. Ted's contribution was the cape on the sheep. But they bypassed Ted. They've gone past Ted. They've got the good stuff now. So Bruntwood Nursery, really fantastic nursery, and the people there were so nice. But they grow just all kinds of different things. A lot of selections of different plants, but also a lot of just the straight species. There's one of the biggest businesses for New Zealand nurseries is revegetation projects. They're big revegetation projects. So people go and will grow out all of these native plants, many of which are not really ornamental at all of which I was buying and taking, trying to get because I was so cool. I thought they were so cool. But they use them for these big projects. They do a lot of their own propagation there, and it was nice because some of the plants that they were growing a lot of, like pineapple guava, which we really struggle with propagating. I got with their propagator and I said, okay, so tell me how do you do this? Because I saw big blocks of it growing out in their container fields. And she said, well, we take about 4 times as many cuttings as we need, because we lose about 3/4 of every cutting we stick in. Figure out, I feel a little bit better. We'll probably do worse than that, but I feel a little bit better. And they are the biggest producer of New Zealand flax in New Zealand. And there's some plants that you associate with other countries, associate with other places, and you get there and sometimes you find it's not that widespread. New Zealand flax, there's 2 species of it. It is everywhere. It's in the wild growing. It's in every landscape. The wild one is just green, but they got purple ones and pink ones and green and purple ones and tall ones and short ones and all kinds of things. That is one, New Zealand flax. It really is everywhere. So I was in Hamilton. I had to stop by the Hamilton Gardens. It was a municipal garden. You could tell that they had periods where there was money infused in there, and they had some really great infrastructure and some really nice gardens. And then there were periods where not so much money was spent there, and things kind of went downhill. So you could really kind of see that. But they had some really beautiful infrastructure in the garden. Beautiful streams going through there, nice bridges, lovely open area. This could be anywhere. This could be in England, northern England. This could be in the, around here, the all over the place, big rhododendrons, all this. And then you get the big tree fern in there, which just immediately, like, that's not London anymore when you get these 30-foot tree ferns out there. But really beautiful gardens. They did have a camellia collection, which I went through. I was really too late to see the camellias, but I did see this one, which had just been cut back. Dr. Clifford Parks, David Parks' father. Yeah, they, like I said, they know their good plants from North Carolina. So I had come into this garden. I kind of went through it pretty quickly. It was okay. It wasn't wonderful. There were some neat things there, and I enjoyed it. There was a big natural area, which was very nice. But this was right near the entrance, and I bypassed on my way in, stopped in at the visitor center up here. And when I was through the visitor center, I talked with somebody, and they said, "Oh, you're American?" I said, "Yes." And they said, "Have you been to the International Garden?" I said, "Well, no, I haven't been there yet." They said, "Well, make sure you read the sign. Make sure you read the sign before you go in and see the American Garden." I said, "Oh, okay." And I went on and kind of forgot about it. I was out in the garden. I was talking to a gardener out there, and he said something about the International Gardens. I said, "Oh, I haven't been there yet." He said, "Make sure you read the sign." So I was really intrigued to see this garden. And it was a really neat area. You came into this center area, and there's a big hedge all the way around this square with little entrances to all these different gardens. So the first one was a Japanese garden contemplation. And I like this because we have a Japanese garden. You go to a place that have a Japanese garden, it doesn't mean anything. Japanese have been gardening for years, and they do not have the same style of gardening the whole time. So if you really look at different periods and different types of gardens during that period, that's a little more meaningful. Most of our gardens are Western interpretations of Japanese gardens. So this was very specific, within 200 years, that's specific enough. The Muromachi period. So it's, it is what you think of a Japanese garden, although if you get in there and really look at the moss, it's more of a native ground cover called leptonella than it is moss in there. But it was kind of nice. English flower garden. This is the 19th century arts and crafts style garden, and a really elegant garden. That was one of the nicest gardens they had there. It's really beautiful. Chinese Scholars Garden. This is based on a garden in Suzhou, China, that I've been to actually. That's really nice. Most Chinese gardens are modeled on this one really famous garden. In large measure because during the Cultural Revolution they destroyed all the other gardens in China, but this one survived intact. Although Duke Gardens is putting in a Chinese garden, and they are not basing it on this garden, which is going to make it really interesting. But really beautiful structures. Really enjoyed that. Perhaps my favorite, the Indian Charbagh Garden, 16th century Indian garden for the Mughal aristocracy. I mean, look at this. I don't think he's period necessarily, but really, striking garden. So then I get to the American Modernist Garden. Late 20th century garden for outdoor living designed in the American West Coast tradition. So I walk in, and it's not too bad. The plants are looking a little peaked, You go around the corner, and this is it. They must have had every American who's gone through there come to the visitor center and say, "That is not what our gardens look like." It was all. There are no plants in it. That may be the one thing that's like a lot of American gardens, but it was bad. And this was the shot to make it look pretty. I was not trying to make it look ugly here. There are some other shots I could have taken that make it look worse. And somehow I don't think, even with this style, I don't know that the Adirondack chairs really fit into that area. But it was a neat garden. So I was heading down to Rotorua. After I left there, I was heading down to Rotorua, mainly because there's some really interesting thermal features. It's very volcanic parts of this island, so there's a lot of hot springs. But I am a huge nerd. So I had to stop halfway down and go to the Shire. I had to. My kids would have been so upset with me. And so you go there. It's the Hobbit set for the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit movies. Although we'll just talk about the Lord of the Rings movies because the Hobbit was just not so good. It's built on a sheep farm in New Zealand, and they use different locations for other things. But the home of the Hobbits is right there on the sheep farm. It's still a working sheep farm. It is a huge farm, still working. They still go, but they do tours. And it's a weird partnership between the owners of the farm and Warner Brothers. And parts of it, Warner Brothers still maintains the whole set, but the owners of the farm run the tours. So you go in. Well, first I'd say they're all about tourists in New Zealand. That's their biggest industry. And this is when I got off the airplane. This is what I saw: big statue of a dwarf. I was tweeting my kids, sending them pictures, probably waking them up in the middle of the night, showing pictures of dwarf statue at the airport. So you come in, you come to the Shire's Rest to start your tour, and this is where the magic happens. I mean, they could take some lessons from Disney. There's a little gift shop down there where they sell like a handful of things. It's like the same wool stuff you can get everywhere in New Zealand, and then a couple of really expensive Hobbit things. It was kind of disappointing, and I'm there by myself. There are whole groups of Asian tourists and German tourists mostly there, and they were all together. And I'm like by myself. I felt like a huge dork, but I was there, so I always go. And it was pretty neat. You get out there, and it's very cool. It looks like the movie set. You can kind of see this is Bilbo's home right there, and this tree on the top. It's not in any of the books. They never mention a tree on top of Bilbo's the top of the hill there, but in one of Tolkien's drawings there was a tree up there. So before the first Lord of the Rings movie, they said, well, we need a tree. They built all this. We need a tree. So they found the tree that they wanted on a neighboring farm, paid an arm and a leg for it. Cut it down, cut it into pieces, numbered all the pieces like you do with a house if you're moving a house, a barn or something like that. Put it back together on top of the hill and glued all the leaves to it. Because that's how Hollywood does it. So when they went to film The Hobbit, that tree had rotted away pretty much. It was, it was not preserved. So they said that just does not make any sense to do that again. So they just built a completely fake tree. For $1 million. That tree that's like in a second of frame, $1 million. That is why you pay $10 for a movie ticket and $8 for a bucket of popcorn. So it was pretty cool. I got to live my 11-year-old fantasy of being a hobbit. So that was okay. But it's beautifully maintained. And I talked with this gardener right here. That's where I figured out that they worked for Warner Brothers. And she also told me that under no circumstances was anybody who worked there allowed to, wear pointed ears or, fuzzy feet shoes or anything like that, or dress like a hobbit. That was forbidden. But they maintain this. There's a whole crew of gardeners out there maintaining this thing year round, trying to make it look like English cottage gardens. This was, I saw this a couple places. This is a Spanish lavender, Lavender sticus, but it's the Lee series, L-E-I-G-H. Lee series, and they have these huge flowers, and they have a bunch of different colors. They have really nice yellow ones. They have some bicolor ones where the calyxes are purple, and then the actual flowers that stick up are yellow. There's some pink ones, the white one. Not available here as far as I can tell. Man, they were really, really nice. But it was a neat garden. But really, it was not my thing. I should have stayed away. But they do end the tour at the Green Dragon, and they give you some nice ale there. Some real. This is New Zealand. It's the real stuff that they give you. And you stay there for a long time, so they'll just keep serving you. Because it is New Zealand. So on to Rotorua, and this is this really neat area. It's right on this Lake Rotorua, and it's all thermally active. You drive in there and all you can smell is sulfur. I mean, it is like you are in hell there. It stinks and everything is steaming and bubbling. And you go walking around out by this lake and there's little pockets where stuff is bubbling up. And there'll be, there's like kind of a walkway with some some barriers so you don't go out there, because a lot of this is just a thin crust. It's not really solid. But what's funny is, so you have some wooden posts with some rope there so you don't go out too far. But if you look out about 5 or 10 feet, there are these wooden posts, well, stumps of wooden posts that are burnt. And I think they just keep moving you over. The path collapses. They move you over, but this is where the Europeans used to go to bathe. They call this one particular hole a coffee pot. They talk about stringing ropes across between the trees and going down there. It would stain your skin and be real good for you. But even here, you see like this little stump. You see it's burnt. These things are hot. That's crazy. But it was a cool area. Now from there, I went up to Taupo, and I wish I could have done it all. New Plymouth, this would have been the perfect time there. That is like the rhododendron capital of the world, they say. They grow rhododendrons better than anywhere else in New Plymouth, and it was peak rhododendron season. But I really wanted to see this national park, Tongariro. This is the highest elevation on the North Island, not in New Zealand, but on the North Island. It's a really large national park that I want to stop in. So I stopped at Taupo. There's a great native plant nursery there, Taupo native plants to stop in. And then down to Tongariro. And I should say, as you go down, all this northern part of the island that I had been on all looked like this. I mean, it just, I was stopping, every 100 yards and taking another picture. And it looks, these rolling green hills, it looks like it could be the foothills of North Carolina or Ireland, except for even greener than Ireland. But then you look in there a little closer and you see tree ferns poking up. It's, they got that little bit of New Zealand in there. But get into and I should mention, the very north part of the island, they have evergreen podocarp forests. You go a little farther south, you get about halfway down the island, and it turns to these the southern beech forests. This is another one that's high on my list to see. This is Nothophagus. They have them in South America, Australia, New Zealand, and they are just beautiful. They have several species. I have a hard time telling them apart. I was getting better by the time I left, but they make these beautiful, beautiful trees, and they look very much. It's one of the few things that really looks like it could come from the northern hemisphere. But you get out into the national park and these wide open spaces, great vistas. It was a little cloudy, so I couldn't see the top of the mountain, unfortunately. But you get out and you look at it, and it looks very fairly uniform. It doesn't look like there's a whole lot of different plants there. But then you start looking closer, and there's all these different things. These Oreseas here, you got ferns, you got some little shrubby thing there, grasses, and all kinds of little stuff creeping around. Silmesias, it's a little aster family, and then these are little scaly Hedis, sometimes lumped in with Veronicas. All these little creepy things are all little low type plants. Really beautiful, but you go out there and it looks like there's 2 or 3 different things, and you get out of your car and you start walking around and you just see just a million different things, none of which I could identify. And as I was leaving, I finally got that almost perfectly clear view of the mountain there, which was pretty exciting. There is a hike you can do across these peaks. It takes a full day. It's one of those things where they say you know what you're doing. Bring a compass to make sure you can find your way. Have water, have food, have warm stuff because it's cold up there in the mountains. And I actually picked up a couple of people from Germany and brought them to where they were staying because they had tried to hike it. It was just too cloudy and foggy, and they were afraid they were going to get lost. So then from there, I had to catch a ferry in Weddington, so I had to do pretty much a marathon stretch from here to here. You cannot go anywhere fast. The speed limit it's slow there. People follow the speed limit. If you don't follow the speed limit, they will mail you a speeding ticket to your home, whatever continent you're on. But Weddington, I got there, I rushed down there, and got there enough time to go to this one place that somebody who's married to a Kiwi told me was her husband's favorite place to go out and see plants there. The Otari Wilton's Bush, which is a kind of part botanic garden, part natural area, right up above Weddington. Weddington's at Harbor, and there's mountains behind it, and you're right above there when you go up there. So I got there, and it said these incredible fern collections and some of it was labeled. So I started trying to figure out some of these ferns there really. Dramatic natural areas. It was the first place I saw. I had not realized going down there that there were 2 native fuchsias to New Zealand. I thought they were all South American. But this is a fuchsia tree. This thing grows 30 feet tall. Fuchsia excordicata. Really beautiful. It's exfoliating bark. The other fuchsia is this little tiny ground covering thing about this tall. So they have a tree and they have this little tiny thing and nothing in between there. There was, at the last place out, Christchurch Botanic Garden, there was a purple leaf one of these. Oh, man. I don't have it. and then the ferry across, and a lot of people, everybody, after I was down where I was going to give my talk, everybody, oh, you took the ferry. How was the weather? Because apparently the crossing can be a little rough. Well, when I was on there, it was like a sheet of glass. It was beautiful. And me and half the other tourists all stood outside in the cold wind, hoping to see some of all some of the aquatic mammals that are down there. I said other than bats, no mammals in New Zealand, except in the water. They have, I think, something like 70% of the cetaceans, the whale relatives, visit New Zealand water. 70% of the species of cetaceans visit the water, and then seals and all kinds of other things down there. So really great. Apparently there was somebody saw something and everybody rushed to it, but I don't like crowds, so I didn't rush over there. Didn't sound like they saw much. So I came in here to Picton, and my plan, from the comfort of my office, figured out how much time I had to be down here at Dunedin in the evening of the next day. I got here about 6 o'clock. I said, okay, I'm going to go down here, go across this side of the island, come over Mountain Cook, or come down here. No problem. Well, after a little bit of traveling through the heavily populated portion of New Zealand, the North Island, I decided that may be a little ambitious. So I decided I'd just come straight down to Dunedin from Picton. And I drove on this road, had to stop for the night somewhere in here. This road, it's Route 1. I'm looking at maps. Route 1. Starts up here, goes down here. This is their biggest road. This is 95. This is their biggest road. It is 2 lanes, except for where it isn't 2 lanes crossing some of the bridges. It goes. There are curves where the speed limit, caution, you slow down. 15 kilometers per hour. You know how slow 15 kilometers per hour is? These things are hairpin turns all on the coast. It was beautiful. I mean, it was just striking, but you could not drive fast. And so I was driving, and it was, and I'm stopping every 10 minutes to take pictures, like this, because it was so beautiful. And it got dark, and so I got going, and I picked the best time to drive on this little winding road that you could pick, because it was the big Australian national rugby team versus the New Zealand All Blacks. And in Dunedin, which is why you couldn't get to Dunedin early. You had to wait until that was over. And this is like World Series, Super Bowl, Final Four. This is all wrapped up in one. This is everybody's out there. So I'm driving along and I'm listening to it on the radio. And there's nobody on the road. I saw not one person after dark on this road once that game started. And then the game's ending. And I'm like, I've got to find a hotel, because I have been around some of these New Zealanders and I know they were drinking. They won. I knew it was not going to be safe to be on that road for much longer. So I pulled over as soon as the game ended and found a hotel, because while everybody was safely in the pub, so it was okay. But beautiful driving down there. These rock faces with all kinds of great stuff growing on them. And this brachyglottis, it's in the aster family. But look at this, the new leaves come out and they are just pure white, covered with this fuzz, growing on these very exposed, very windy limestone cliffs. You only saw them growing on the cliff. I got out, I was out in my car, I'm going around, I'm looking at a bunch of different stuff in this one area where I first started seeing all these brachyglottis, because they were so cool. And I tried to collect a couple little ones that were growing out of the rock, and you couldn't get them out. I mean, they had a root that went back a mile into solid rock. But I didn't see any on the flat ground. So I'm going around, and all of a sudden I see this one great big one. And I go over to it, and it was on a slab of rock. I mean, it was like poured concrete. There's nothing else growing there. And this thing had found a crevice about 1/4 of an inch wide and had a plant like this growing out of it. Amazing, amazing things. And of course, all the New Zealand flax. Now, one thing, when Ted had gone to New Zealand, he came back, gave a talk to the department, and he talked about this one area where they had what they called Moeraki Boulders. And it was one of the things that really stuck in my head. And it just so happened, I was looking through something and realized I was going to be passing this spot. So I was like, I'm going to try and find it. And I mean, it's, again, this is not like the U.S. at all. The place I stopped, there was a little restaurant, little gift shop, and there's some wooden steps down to the beach, and there's a little, kiosk there. It's $2, 2 New Zealand dollars to go down there and look at the rock. There's nobody there taking your money. There's just a canister there, and they chuck a good thing. You go down there, and on the beach are these boulders. They're from 3 feet to 5 feet diameter. There's a person kind of for perspective in there. Perfectly round boulders that are just hanging out there. And there are quite a few different theories as to how they're formed. None of them, nobody knows. None of these theories have been proven to be correct. But they are so cool. They're just perfectly round. As well. So finally got down to Dunedin. And Dunedin is a really neat city. They were celebrating their 150th anniversary in Dunedin. So Dunedin's way down here. This is, I want to say this was 20, 40 miles. It was a long 20 miles maybe from here to here. Maybe it's kilometers. And from here to here. And it did go from all the way this tip here, all the way around to this tip here with a group. This is where I spent the majority of my time, the longest amount of time. But of course, I did go in and visit the gardens. This is the host garden for where I was down there for. I was down for the 5th Global Botanic Gardens Congress International. So Dunedin Botanic Garden, and Chris will tell you. Chris deals with all my photos when I come back. I dump them all to Chris, and he gets them all online, and I have to go through and label them. And I did like 1,000 photos. I think I took 3,000 some photos in New Zealand. I took 1,000 of them at Dunedin Botanic Garden. Amazing place. Blew my mind. And it is just, garden-wise, it is spectacular. Now, I will say, they were inviting in the entire botanical world at this Botanic Gardens Congress International. So they were really, I'm sure, frantically working to get everything up to snuff. But they did. I mean, it was pristine. And I saw so many things I'd never seen before. Not just New Zealand plants, just all kinds of things. And things used fantastically. Incredible rock gardens. The most spectacular rock garden I've ever seen. The Rhododendron Garden. They have a huge rhododendron garden. It's one of the biggest areas of the garden. And everything's just in full bloom. You had the evergreen rhododendron. You had whole big fields of our deciduous rhododendron or deciduous azaleas that they were growing so much better than this. I mean, this thing was enough to just, it was spectacular. You wanted to, it's the place to fall in love. And I know that for a fact. I did not take any pictures after that because we would have gone beyond our rating, I think. It was something. Everybody walk around, kind of, you'd see other people, and they kind of laugh. That was a happy couple. So one of the things that's really fascinating about New Zealand plants is these divaricating plants. It's something like 10% of their flora, and 80% of their flora is endemic to New Zealand, or some huge number. 10% of it is divaricating, which means widely spaced branching. So you see how you can look in here, you got a branch going up, and then the other branchlets are going straight out. And they do that, and they have little tiny leaves, in some cases no leaves at all. So this is a coprosma. This is a Tucridium, completely different family, no relation at all. I mean, almost the exact same growth habit. An Olearia, very much the same growth habit, a little different color. And often with these divaricating plants, they'll have most of their leaves in towards the interior and have flowers in there. And there's been a lot of different theories, but the theory that's rising to the top is because they don't have grazing mammals there. They don't have a lot of thorny plants. Thorns, mammals, when they stick their noses into things, they have thorns and they have soft noses. Well, the animal that took the place of mammals, the grazing mammals, like ungulates and deer and things like that, are birds, the moas. And you had these, about 9 or 10 different species of moas, some of them 12 feet tall. These are huge birds. I mean, think about, ostrich on steroids. No wings at all, not even vestigial wings, just completely wingless birds. But their beaks are hard and spiny, so thorns don't really hurt them. But if you have a plant like this, they can go in there and snip that and eat that, and they don't get to the important parts of the plant where the leaves and most of the leaves and the flowers are in the interior. It's a way of the plant protecting itself, and they can snip off pieces, and it doesn't really affect the plant like it does with, you look at our shrubs where you have just a few stems going up. Bird comes in there and snips off one of them, or somebody comes in and takes a cutting off something with only 2 branches. You can kill the plant, but this you don't kill the plant. And what they found is some studies show the more fertile the ground is, where you would expect more food and more of the moas feeding, the more divaricating plants you had, and the more extreme spots wouldn't have so many divaricating plants. So even things we know, like rubus, this is a blackberry relative. Even there, the rubus is basically leafless and divaricating. Very cool. Now I was at a nursery and I'm looking at this plant and I'm talking to the nurseryman. This is after I'd spent hours, and I mean literally hours, going through the native plant gardens at Dunedin Botanic Garden. And I'm talking to the nurseryman who does all native plants for revegetation. And I'm saying, I just can't even figure out what family these are in, much less what genera. And he goes, oh, you got to look at the flowers. I'm like, I never see the flowers. He's like, they're all in flower right now. That's the flower. That's the leaf. That's the flower. I'm like, oh, come on. This is a coprosma. I did actually identify some plants in the wild based on their flowers once I realized I had to get a microscope out to see. But you can see some of these plants. This is one that's getting tall. It's a coprosma. But you look, divaricating down here. Up here it gets mature and starts flowering up here. Now not all divaricating plants do, but some do. So once they get above moa height, they start growing into normal growth. And there are other plants, not divaricating plants, that do the same thing. Pseudopanics, a lot of the pseudopanics, this is Pseudopanics ferox, fierce, for these long leaves with little spines. One stem, doesn't branch at all, just has all these leaves coming down, they go down, and they're thick and leathery and spiny and nasty. And then, once it gets up to a certain height, and there's a young one, it does this. This and this are the same thing. This and this are the same thing. Completely different plant. They get above moa height, and then they can grow like a regular plant. Crazy. But another thing, I spent a lot of time in this native plant garden here. They had a whole bed of variegated native plants. Oh my gosh, this was variegated New Zealand natives. This, you still might be in the car. That thing I showed you on the cliff face, that was a brachioglottis. This is a variegated brachioglottis. Ah, man. They let me, I was there, I took cuttings of this. Half of all the stuff I mailed out I got inspected and mailed from Wellington, got here quickly. All the stuff that I had inspected and mailed out of Christchurch, it disappeared off the face of the earth. I know. I'm with you. These Westringias, these are the Australian rosemaries. These are New Zealand Australian plants, I should say. So Westringia, they call it Australian rosemary. It looks a lot like rosemary. Typically all green, but look at this. So good. This thing, Phobalium, you sometimes see this in the U.S. This is an upright plant. This is one illumination. I've never seen this before. It was so striking. And so I get up there and I'm like up off the path over there, really getting into this plant, taking pictures and everything. And I hear somebody, hey, scared me to death, because I'm feeling guilty. I'm off the path. I yell at people for getting off the path and packing the soil and everything. And it's bad, you don't want to say, no, it's okay. I do this for a living. And then you're like, yeah, you know better. Turn around, And it's hey. I got a kick out of that, you know. Went over to the next, did the same thing. And so he said, "Excuse me," and don't even turn around. "Excuse me." It's the guy who takes care of the birds. And he's like, he gave me a hard time. And I explained to him that I talked with, you know, who I had talked with the staff there, and that I was allowed to take a few cuttings of things that were large enough. He was okay, because he did, with the guy, the bird just caught me taking pictures. The guy caught me with cuttings in my hand. It was a little embarrassing. So one day we took a bus trip, this group, and we started out here, went all through, visited some places here, and then all the way out here. And we visited some natural areas here, not really a lot, that mostly covered in gorse. Invasive stuff is a real problem in New Zealand. But on our way out to the tip here, we stopped at a place called Lanark Castle. And I was not real keen to go there because I'd seen some photos, and it was not my kind of thing. It was, you know, it was pretty, and then like this is the kind of thing you would see photos of, and okay, I appreciate formality and coupled with whimsy there. You got the white hair, and you know these really nice clipped parterre beds. I think it was very nice. But what you never see is there's this hillside of the most incredible plants from all over the world, and the woman who lived there and gardened there, and she knew every plant there. I mean, she was a gardener. She had gardeners who worked for her, but let me tell you, she was the driving force behind there. And I spent a good bit of time just talking with her, going through there, and just these combinations, just phenomenal. And really, if you turn and look out, you're looking out over the harbor, and you got the mountains on the other side of the harbor. She said that whales and seals and things come right in there, and just past there is the end point, and that's where they have the osprey nesting site. I think it's the only the biggest osprey, royal albatross. Thank you, royal albatross. The only nesting site of the royal albatross, the biggest albatross on inhabited land. You know, everything else is on these little rocks out in the ocean. So they had the albatrosses there, but they also have penguins. They have 2 penguins on there. Well, I found out penguins go out in the ocean during the day and come back in at night. So you got to go there at like 8 o'clock at night to see the penguins. So I didn't get to see one type, but I did get to see the blue-eyed penguin, which is a little guy about this big, and that one's a nocturnal one. And they have like these stands where you can stand and you can watch the penguins come in. It's fenced off. You can't get to where the actual penguins are, but you can watch them swimming. Well, under these stands, they've got little wooden boxes that you got to get down and crawl down, and all the little blue-eyed penguins are all sleeping down there under where everybody's standing all day. So, it was him giving me a dirty look. He's actually, this is all under this whole big thing, and I'm laying on my stomach. I was excited. I wanted to see a penguin. I've never seen a penguin in the wild. So I was actually there to give a talk. This is my proof to any of y'all who helped fund this trip. I did actually go, and during my part of the session, it was myself, a woman from Indonesia, somebody from South Africa, somebody from Australia, and somebody from China. So I mean, this is the Global Botanic Gardens Congress. I mean, it really was a little bit of everybody there. So it was amazing hearing all these different talks there. So that's enough of that. So my plan on leaving here, I visited a nursery out here, and then I was going to come down here to Fjordland. There's no roads over here. You can only go alongside this. You can go here, and then I wanted to go to Milford Sound, but couldn't get a hotel. And then up to Queenstown, past there, and going to go up over here. This is where all the glaciers are that you can go up on top of. Franz Joseph Glacier. I'm going to do that, and then come up and come back over to Christchurch. So I drive out there, get down here. It's foggy and raining, can't see a thing. Kind of a disappointment. Come back up, spend the night here. Drive up here. There's been a landslide. Road's closed. Maybe it'll open tomorrow. So I said, all right, I'll stay. I stayed right at a place right where they closed off the road for the landslide. I did watch the road to make sure there weren't like locals driving by. This was some trap to get me to stay at this not wonderful place. But nobody was going up there. So the next day I waited around. We'll know at 10 o'clock. So I waited around. Maybe at 12 o'clock we'll know something. Forget it. So I came up here to go over Mount Cook, get up here to the glaciers, and then come over. Go up to Mount Cook. And I mean, I got to say, it's beautiful, the whole area. It's beautiful. This was kind of this central, it's called the Central Otago region. It's beautiful. It looks almost like something from Mexico. You got these brown grasses, except for there, these are all sedges, they're all carex. And then these little things that are like yuccas or agaves, except for they're related to parsley. They're in the Apiaceae family, they're umbellifers. And throw me in a bunch of agaves before going on near these things. They are vicious. They draw blood. A lot of blood. I left a lot of blood up there. But again, it looks barren, but look how fantastic it is. And there's all kinds of things. So they have Hebes there that they're trying to put back into Veronicas. This is a Hebe relative called a Heebie-Jeebie. That's its actual scientific name, Heebie-Jeebie. Forget about Veronicas, Heebie-Jeebies. And this little spiny, grassy looking thing, that's related to Rhododendron. Figure. But these beautiful scenes out there. This is an area called the Pillars, I think, or the Columns. I drove out there, and I really want to get out there. It rained the night before. I find this little track. I drive along it. It had a sign, something conservation, and I hadn't seen people for 2 hours, and the roads got worse and worse, and there were these mud pits, and I kept crossing my finger. No cell service, nothing. I came out the other end, and there was a conservation services guy there, and he stopped me, and he said, "Did you just drive all the way through there?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "In that?" There's a little RAV4, and I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You don't have chains?" I said, "No." And he goes, "You're lucky." It was a little sketchy there for a while. But so then going over Mount Cook, the tallest mountain in New Zealand. So driving up through there, I mean, it's the Alps, the Rockies, but then with New Zealand at the base. It's amazing. Look at that. That is not Photoshop. That's actual color. And then you have that at in these valleys. Just spectacular. So I get up to Mount Cook, getting near the crest of Mount Cook, and it is a blizzard. I mean, a blizzard. And so once again, I get stopped as I'm getting up there, and the policeman this time stops me and he says, "You got to put chains on." I said, "Well, this is a rental car. I don't think it has chains." So I'm over the side of the road with the cop, and we're looking around, seeing if they have chains, and if the rental company put chains in the car. No. He goes, "Can't go on." And turn back. So I never got to see the glaciers. I had to go around and turn around and go back. But it gets cold there. I mean, we were late spring when I was there, and man, it was frigid there. That's about just under 10,000 feet. So I had to come back down and go back along the coast up to Christchurch. Christchurch a couple years ago had a bad earthquake there. And so everywhere you go, there's still roads that are blocked off, and you see this everywhere. And I couldn't figure out what it was. Finally realized it's the semi-trailers are filled with sand or gravel. They're stacked up, and then they're bolted to the facades, historic facades there. The backside is all gutted and gone and rebuilt, and they're just trying to preserve the historic facades around Christchurch. Which is a really neat city, and I mean, it really was devastating. There were all these, I was so impressed with all this green space they had around Christchurch and in Christchurch, these big expanses of kind of just open grass parkland. Talked to somebody there, and that's where houses had all fallen down. They had bulldozed and leveled it out and just sown seed there, so it didn't look so bad. But you see all these, what were once neighborhoods, just gone there. But the Botanic Garden had survived pretty well. I won't go in detail. It was a nice Botanic Garden, wasn't the best. But the river that goes through there is the River Avon. So you can have you can go for a little punt on River Avon through the Botanic Garden, which would be kind of nice. It was a beautiful setting for a garden. It was their 150th anniversary as well. you could tell that they didn't have quite as much money as the Dunedin Garden did. You know, the money was being spent on things like rebuilding the city, so you can't blame. So that's kind of and then I flew out from there. The flight home is always longer than the flight coming in. But I always, afterwards, I always try to think of, you know, what are some things that I learn when I travel? Because I'm always trying to learn something. And, you know, the plants, obviously, I learned a lot about the plants. I still, you know, it's one of those, the more you know there is to know with the plants. But I did learn a few things. I was there during the lambing season. They were all just a few weeks old. I grew up out in the country, cows, you know. I did not know that sheep had long tails. Every sheep I've seen had a little stubby tail. And I didn't know, they cut them off. But the lambs had these long tails, and they wag them like dogs. I cannot believe they cut these tails off. Apparently it's hygienic because they get a little dirty. But man, they were the cute. I know lambs are cute, but a lamb wagging its tail? That was awesome. It was interesting to learn. My kids say I'm big on baby animals. They show me pictures on YouTube of baby animals and things. I learned that kiwis are nocturnal, so that is as close as I got to a kiwi, or at least as close as I got to seeing one. But they go up high. This is on top of Mount Cook. You can see the snow around it. I did learn that shoes well, I don't know about shirts. I know shoes are not required in fast food places. Based on a lot of places, my guess is shirts are not required as well. Found the best drink in the world. If anybody's been to New Zealand, or if anybody goes to New Zealand, I will pay good money for you to bring back a case of L&P. This stuff, it's good lemonish stuff. That's what it says on it. Good lemonish stuff, world famous in New Zealand. You can order it from Amazon.com. Not very expensive. Shipping for 2 cans, $45. I haven't broken down and done it yet, but I might. And like I said, it gets cold there. I did learn that. And apparently you can make anything out of well, I was going to say wool, and possum fur in New Zealand. They don't like the possums there. They'll use them for anything. So that was it. I probably should have looked at a clock. It was probably 2 or 3 hours, but thank you all for listening to me. And